I want to ask you a question. My question to you this morning is, what motivates you? What motivates you? I want you to think about it for a few minutes here, or a few seconds, and ask yourself, what motivates me? What motivates me? Now, there's this personality test, personality assessment, and there's hundreds of them, but in one of these personality assessments, what it does is it actually shows you that every single kind of person with their own personality has certain desires that motivate them, and they also have certain fears that motivate them. And for each person, those fears can be different. And I don't think I really knew this about myself. I didn't realize that fear was such a driving factor for me until recent years. And until I started to study this and figure out, wow, okay, maybe I do have a fear that drives me. And I'll give you my example, so maybe you can think about what could be the fear that motivates me. Could there be a fear that really motivates me? And for me, sometimes it's a fear of disappointing people. So maybe in school, in middle school and high school, I had a fear of disappointing my parents with the bad grades. So I would work really hard and try to stay up late and try to do my best so that I can make my parents proud. Because I was honestly a little bit fearful of getting them disappointed. And it's not just with school, but with many other things. Maybe I had this fear of disappointing people. So maybe even sometimes if I see one of my friends doing something that I disagree with, I will choose maybe not to tell them something, not to say, hey, are you sure you want to be doing that? Because I don't want to disappoint them. I feel like maybe my relationship with them, it might get hurt, and maybe they'll be disappointed in how I am as a friend, even though maybe to be a better friend would actually be to point out what's going on in their life. But I was motivated a little bit by fear. Maybe even sometimes here at church, sometimes I make decisions or I do things or I try to work more, or I try to work harder because I feel like, I don't want to disappoint our church. I don't want to disappoint our people here. So I'm going to work hard. I'm going to put in extra hours, and maybe you feel that way yourself. Maybe in your job, maybe at your school, maybe with a mentor or a leader of yours, you don't want to disappoint them. Maybe that's a fear for you. I know that's one of the fears that motivates me. And sometimes it makes me think, okay, I'm not enough. I'm not doing enough. I'm not being enough. I'm not loving enough. I'm not caring enough. So I try to do more and more and more. And as a result, what I found is that I actually live my life a little bit more hurried, a little bit more rushed, so that I can make sure to not disappoint. So I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to work really fast. I'm going to try really, really put everything in me so that I don't disappoint. What I found is that this is a motivation of mine, and maybe this is not a good motivation. Sometimes it's like stress. Some stress can be good, but if that's all that we're moved by, maybe that's not a good thing. That's part of our broken nature. We are motivated by some of our fears. And this morning, we're going to look at a group of people who were very motivated by fear, and a man who chose not to be motivated by fear, but rather chose to be motivated by his faith. And we're going to see the difference of what the results of being motivated by fear are versus the results of being motivated by our faith, being moved by our faith rather than being moved by our fear. So we're going to look at a story that maybe we've seen before, maybe you learned in Sunday school, maybe you haven't heard it before, but it's the story of this man named Daniel. And Daniel, during this time where we're going to read in Daniel 6, we're going to look at the king who was ruling at this time. Daniel was under many kings, but the king that he was ruling, who was under at this time, was this guy named King Darius. And King Darius loved Daniel. Daniel was a great guy. He did a lot of great stuff. He trusted him with decisions, and he was wise. And so Darius loved Daniel. And because he loved him so much, his co-workers, his other government officials that were kind of alongside Daniel, started to get jealous of him and started to think, oh man, He's getting really close to the king. The king really loves him. The king really trusts him. But you know what? The king is arrogant. So maybe if we play a little bit on the king's arrogance of how much he likes himself, how much he sees himself as this great king, he's awesome, maybe we can kind of twist his arm a little bit to trick him into doing something that would hurt Daniel, that would put him in jeopardy. So we're going to see the difference here, because these men were motivated by fear. They were motivated by a fear that Daniel could have a leg up on them, that Daniel could be better than them, that Daniel would be more loved and favored in the eyes of the king, that he would become more influential than them. And for them, that's their goal. They really want to be up top. They want to be up by the king, making all the big decisions. And they didn't just want to see Daniel be demoted. They wanted Daniel dead. And it was their fear that was motivating them to go and make these decisions, to go and twist this king's arm in a way that he thought was a good idea. They were motivated by their fear. And here's the thing. Fear is something that comes up in the Bible all the time. And fear is actually something that God has given each and every single one of us. God has given us emotions, and our emotions are good, and we just have to decide what are we going to do with our emotions. So sometimes fear is a danger sign. Oh my gosh, something's coming, someone's going to come hurt me, I got to run away. That's a good way to use fear. But when fear makes us make decisions that dishonor God, that elevate us over others, that's when fear becomes twisted and becomes a motivating factor to make us do things that oppose who we want to be, who God calls us to be. So this is where fear is going to turn not into trusting God, but into taking the decisions and actions into their own hands. That is when fear turns to sin. Because Jesus even says, hey, listen, my peace I give to you. Do not be afraid. When he talks to his disciples, he's telling them, do not fear, do not fear. So he's telling us to not fear often, but what context are we not to fear? What context is fear good and fear not good? So we're seeing here, what we're going to see is that these men are going to make decisions based on fear so that they can move fast and get ahead of Daniel rather than him getting ahead of them. So we're going to look here, Daniel 6, verse 10. We're going to start in verse 10. Here's what it says. Now Daniel learned the decree had been published. What's this decree? So in order to twist the king's arm around, they said, hey, king, you're an awesome king. You are handsome. You're smart. You're like a god. You should have people worship you for this month. You should have people, instead of worshiping all of their gods, we should all worship you. And the king is an arrogant king. He likes to be talked up. He likes people to tell him how great he is. So he said, that's a great idea, guys. Let's do it. So he writes this decree. He signs it. He puts his ring on it, and it's official, and it can't be reversed. And so he signs this decree that no one can worship any other god except for him. So he signed this decree. It had been published, and Daniel heard about it. So what does he do? He went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. You know, the first song that we sang this morning said these words, when I fight, I'll fight on my knees. With my hands lifted high, oh God, this battle belongs to you. And you notice what Daniel's doing here. There's a battle that's coming up against him. And the first thing he does is he gets on his knees and prays to God. But if you're anything like me, you're like, okay, Daniel, go pray. That's a good idea. But why open the windows wide open? Can't you just pray? Can you pray with the windows closed? I mean, even Jesus in the New Testament, he's talking in Matthew 6. He's telling all the people, this massive crowd, when you pray, don't make a big deal about it. Don't make everybody listen to you and look at, oh, wow, look at him praying. So why is Daniel choosing to make this show of him praying. Daniel, come on, let's be smart a little bit. Let's not show off to the world about your prayers, especially when you know that you could be killed for this. But Daniel is getting down on his knees. He knows that this battle does not belong to him. He knows that these people are trying to use fear to motivate him to do something that opposes who he knows that he is. It's not even just about what he does, but he knows who he is. He is a God follower. He worships the one and only God. And so because that's who he is, he's going to choose to do that. He's not going to let that fear motivate him. How does he have so much fear? How does he choose to take a stand and make it public to the whole world that he's living in? Hey guys, look at me. I'm not going to worship this king. I'm going to worship the one and only God. His decision is clearly not motivated by fear. Because if it was, he maybe would have closed the windows. He maybe would have even compromised a little bit on faith and said, you know what, maybe I'll go worship this king just for this month. Just for this month. You know, whatever. It's just a month. I'm going to live for like 60, 70, 80, 90 years. It's just a month. How bad could it be? But he's motivated by his faith, and his faith is what moves him, not his fear. Now let's keep reading. Let's go to verses 11 through 12. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during this next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands, in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be replead. Replead? Thank you. ESL. It's all right. Repealed. Can't read sometimes. Fear makes you fast. Fear makes you fast. I want to pause here and look at these officials who were opposed to Daniel. I want to ask, why did they choose to do what they did? Why did they trick this king into signing this decree? I want to tell you a story. Almost exactly a year ago, Rachel and I got our dog, Pepper. And when we first got her, we got her from a shelter. And in the shelter, there's tons of other dogs sitting around. And when they feed them food, they probably put it in this bowl. Maybe they have a bowl for each dog, but they're all in this one big room together. At least that's what we saw when we were doing a FaceTime because it was COVID and we couldn't go meet the dog in person. So it was a bunch of dogs and they smelled really bad. And so when they would give them food, they would all kind of run to the food and eat as much of it as they can because they knew this other dog was going to come and try to eat it, and this other dog was going to come and try to eat it. They didn't have their own little individual bowls. They probably had, maybe they had their own individual bowls, but the reality was other dogs were going to come out and try to eat their food. And so when we got Pepper and we would give her food at home, we'd put the food in the bowl, and all you'd hear was like, and you wouldn't hear any crunching. So I was worried. I was like, why is our dog not crunching? It's just she's literally just swallowing the food. Like she's not chewing it. She's not enjoying it. She's just inhaling it she would eat it so fast. They literally make like this maze kind of dog bowl so that you would slow the dog down from eating. And we're like, nah, we're not going to pay for that. But for like 6-8 months, Pepper would just inhale her food. She wouldn't chew it. She wouldn't even look at it. She would just look down and try to finish it as fast as possible. And then recently, in the last maybe like 2 months or so, we started to hear a little bit of crunching. And she's eating slower. And I was trying to figure out, why is she eating slower? Why did she stop swallowing it without chewing it? And as I thought about it, you know what? It's probably because she trusts us. It's probably because she knows that we're not going to try to take her food away from her. It's probably because she has faith that, you know what? In the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, she's going to get a meal and no one else wants to eat her food. Although I did chew some of her biscuits yesterday just to try to break them down a little bit because they're too big. I don't know why they make dog treats so big. She doesn't need all that. Anyway, side note. Pepper started to trust us. So she stopped eating so fast. What I want to talk about today is that fear makes you fast. It hurries your life. It gets you to move really quickly in order to make sure that someone else doesn't get ahead of me, that someone else isn't going to beat me to the top, someone else isn't going to be better than me, someone else isn't going to eat my food, someone else isn't going to take what is mine or what I hope will be mine. And Pepper was taking matters into her own hands, or literally into her own mouth. She was just, and I wonder, what do we do? What actions do we take? What steps do we take when we notice that, oh man, I'm a little afraid. Oh, there's some fear in me. How am I going to act on my fear? How am I living maybe in this mentality of scarcity where there isn't enough to go around? There isn't enough for me, and I don't want them to get it, so I'm going to work really hard to get it for myself. At least in this context. At least when we see what's going on with these men that are opposed to Daniel. See, their fear started to bring about some jealousy. And they're noticing, oh, he's better at this, he's better than me at that, he's better than me at this. And so that jealousy led to greed. Of, okay, well, we want to be better than him. We want more than him. And so what are we going to do? That greed turns to selfishness to say, you know what? We don't care about him. We only care about us. And so because of that, that leads to attempted murder. Hopefully none of us ever get to that point. But what does fear make us do? How does it rush our life? Man, I want to really get into a good school. And I don't have enough time to study for 18 hours like this guy does, but he has all the answers in his paper. So because I want to move fast, rather than studying, I'm just going to work on my peaking skills. What does fear make us do? Rather than solving an issue with my friend that I'm having a conflict with, or my family member that I'm having a conflict with, I'm just going to yell it out and hope that that is going to make it go faster and just move on. I'm going to be better, and I'm going to yell hard, and I'm going to show that I'm stronger. Because I'm afraid that, man, this is going to take so long. I don't want to deal with this, so I'm just going to alpha male this and just get it over with. What do we do? What does fear make you do? I heard this quote. It says this: the more insecure you are, the more you strive for attention, fame, and success because you need to be noticed. The more fear and the more insecurity that is in us, the more we're going to strive for more because we want to be noticed, we want attention, we want people to see us, and so we push hard to get there. And then he says this: the less you need to impress people and are good with the way you are. I read that wrong. Here's what it says. The more secure you are, because you are motivated by faith rather than fear, the less you need to impress and are good the way you are. Got to ask ourselves, do we trust God's timing, or do we want to take things into our own hands? Do we want to move things fast so that we can make sure that we get what we want, what we think is best, rather than what God thinks is best, what God knows is best? God, I'm not sure that you're going to provide for me. I'm not sure that these dreams that I have are going to be fulfilled. The reality is, maybe they won't, but do you trust God enough with the next steps? Jesus in Matthew 6 talks about the lilies of the field. He says, why are you worrying about your clothing? Look at the lilies of the field, how they grow. They do not work to make their clothing, yet Solomon in all his glory was never dressed as beautifully as they are. And if God cares so wonderfully for the wildflowers that are here today and then thrown into the fire tomorrow, he will certainly care for you. Why do you have such little faith? Do we trust God? That hymn that we sing, oh, 'tis so sweet to trust in Jesus. Do I trust Jesus? Do I trust in his provision? Do I trust that he's going to provide for me? You know, one of the reasons that we don't trust, one of the reasons that we fear, one of the reasons that we have anxiety is because we don't know our worth. We don't know how valuable we are. You know, when Jesus is saying, look at these lilies, they're here today and they're thrown into the fire tomorrow, but I care for them. I make sure that they have what they need. Look at the birds of the air. They don't cook their own food. They have their food. I give it to them. How much more does God care about you and me than he cares about the lilies or the birds or the things that are around us? He cares so much. He values us so much that he gave his one and only Son so that we could have life. That's how much he values us. That's how much worth we have in his eyes. And so if we see that, if we know that, if we believe that, can that help us to trust him more and more? Here these men did not trust God. They did not know God enough to trust him. So they took matters into their own hands. In order to get ahead, they had to tear others down. In order to succeed, they had to make sure that others failed. And here's a way that I think we can know if we're more secure in who we are in Christ or we're not, or if we're filled with fear and insecurity. Here's a way that you can test yourself. When you see one of your friends succeeding, when you see one of your friends getting that job or getting that school, getting into that school that they're hoping for, that maybe you applied for as well, but you didn't get in. How do you feel? Do you celebrate them? Or do you get mad that they got it and you didn't? Because if you're celebrating them, you're trusting, you know what, I didn't get it, but I trust that God has something for me. I trust that he's going to provide for me just like he provided for those lilies, just like he provided for those birds. And so I'm not going to be motivated by my fear. I'm going to be motivated by my faith. I'm going to praise God through this battle that, man, I'm having a hard time that I didn't get this thing that I was hoping for, that maybe my friend did, but you know what? I'm going to trust and be motivated by my fear. My actions are going to be motivated by my fear. So I want to show you this picture that maybe will help us out. How do we respond to fear? And I'll give you five potential ways that you might do that. First thing that we might do is we might curse our fear. Oh, dang it, why this? Why me? Why? And we're mad at it. And even sometimes it turns towards God, and we're angry at God. We curse God for the unfortunate events that happen, the fears that overwhelm us. Maybe we nurse our fear. Oh, mommy, oh me, why? We nurse it. We it's almost like this little baby that we and we're you're just like petting your fear, trying to, oh, that's okay. We're gonna get through it. Oh, maybe we nurse it. Maybe that's what you do. Sometimes I do that. Maybe we rehearse it. We play it over and over in our head until it takes over our mind, and we can't think of anything else. We keep playing that fear in our head, and we don't think about God. We don't think about other people. We just think about us and our fears and our worries and our anxieties, and so we rehearse it over and over in our head. Maybe you're a disperser of your fear. I'm going to talk to Philippe, and then I'm going to talk to Muller, and then I'm going to talk to Mama, and then I'm going to talk to Rachel, and then I'm going to talk to Mike, and then I'm going to talk to Freddie, and I'm going to talk to Uncle and Teta and Giddo and Sito and Habibi and Habibto and everybody in this world. I'm going to tell them all of my fears, all of my worries, so that maybe the more I talk about it, the less fear that I have, the less worries I have. So I just spray it out there. Or maybe we reverse it. Maybe we rely on God in our fear. Rather than taking it into our own hands, rather than doing with it what we think, we put it in his hands. We say, you know what, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust your word. I'm going to trust that if I am motivated by my faith and my actions are going to be followed by my faith rather than by my fear, then I'm going to trust your word. I'm going to trust your promises. I know that you said that in this life you will have many troubles, and here I am. Here's another trouble that I'm walking through. Here's another issue that I'm trying to deal with. But you know what? I am going to be motivated and led by my faith in you rather than by my fears in me. The more we know God, the more we can trust God. And Daniel knew God. He knew that he was the one and only God that he could trust. And so in this moment of fear, where he knew that his life was on the line if he were to worship God, he chose to be motivated by his faith. He chose to say, I'm going to take a stand, and nothing is going to waver me this way or that way. I'm going to keep walking down the line, following what he says to me. So he prays. So when I fight on my knees. With my hands lifted high, oh God, this battle belongs to you. This is what Daniel is doing. He's trusting God. He's trusting that God will walk with him through these issues. No matter what the outcome is, he's going to trust God. So what happens in this story? Daniel is taken. The law, the decree can't be reversed. So they take him and they roll open this stone where they throw Daniel in to this, basically this grave where there are lions who are going to consume him. You know, this stone that's being rolled away, it's a grave, and then they roll the stone back over. It reminds me of another stone that was rolled. Somebody was thrown into this grave. No one ever thought he'd come back out. But that's not the end of our story. That's not the end of our story in a couple of weeks when we celebrate Easter together either. But he gets thrown in. And the king is crushed, and he's so sad about Daniel going down into this grave where these lions are surely to consume him because they don't eat unless someone is thrown in there as a punishment for breaking the king's laws. And the king was crushed. He was so sad, and as he's leaving him and as he sees him gets thrown in, he says, you know what, Daniel, I hope the God that you praise, that you worship, is going to protect you. And he leaves, and he can't sleep that night, and he comes back the next morning hoping maybe, you know what, maybe there's a chance that he's still alive. Maybe there's a chance that this God that he trusted in, that he's so motivated by his faith to follow, maybe there's a chance that God saved him from the lion's claws and teeth. So I just want to read, this is going to be a little bit of a bigger chunk, but I just want to read to us what happens next. Verse 19, at the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from the lions? And maybe there's a moment of silence. And he's waiting to hear, will I hear a voice responding? And Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God has sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions, and they have not hurt me, because I have found innocence in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den, and when Daniel was lifted out of the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And then look at how the story ends. This is what the king says. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. The God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. This was a man who was motivated by his faith. The outcome of the men who were motivated by their fear was that what they hoped would happen to Daniel ended up happening to them. And what they hoped to happen to them ended up happening to Daniel. The story was reversed. They were hoping for him to be killed and for them to be elevated, and yet here in this moment we see the story is reversed, that Daniel is now elevated with the king, and these people who are motivated by their fear get eaten alive by their own fears. The hope that they had for themselves was reversed. Now, realistically, let's be real, right? We're real people. The outcome sometimes is not always like this for us. Sometimes we're really hoping for something. Sometimes we're really having faith for God to come through, for some breakthrough to happen in our lives. And sometimes that doesn't always happen. That's not always how the story goes. And there are these friends of Daniel who were in a very similar situation. And I'm sure the words that they said as they were about to be thrown into this pit of fire rang through his head as he decided to have his actions be motivated by his faith. When they said, you know what, King? You might throw us in this fire, and God will rescue us. But even if he doesn't rescue us, we're still going to have faith in him. We're still going to believe that he is the God of the world and not you, not some other God. We only trust in him. That takes a lot of faith to be able to say that. It takes a lot of faith to be able to get rejected, to be able to get thrown out, and still trust that God is good. Still trust that he is going to be with us. He might not promise us a perfectly easy life, but he does promise that he will be with us. If you were with us last week, he gave us these promises that we can hold on to. His promises of his love, his promises of his peace through all anxiety or fear or worries. He promised that he will be with us. And as a result of his faith, not only did it solidify Daniel in Christ, in God, but look at how it pointed others towards God. This king who had just a day ago told everybody to be worshiping him, to be praising him, to say, I am the God, now turns and says, this is the God of Daniel. We all need to worship his God. Look at how incredible this God is. And I want to challenge us as a community. Do we have enough faith to live out this trust in Jesus so that people can look into our lives and say, wow, I want to trust his God. I want to trust her God. That's a God that I can trust. That's a God that I can follow. Look at, even in their trials, even in their most broken moments, they say, I'm going to trust God over myself. I'm not going to take things into my own hands. So I want to invite up the worship team as we close out with this last song. And as we sing this and as we worship together, this song is a song called Who You Say I Am. What I love about this is, again, it's a reminder. Why can I have faith? Why can I trust God? Well, it's because who God is and what he says about you. His words are more powerful than our own words. We can trust his words over our own words or the words of our friends or our parents or whoever it is that's speaking things over us. Who are we going to believe? Who did Daniel believe? And what was he motivated by? He was motivated by his faith, and his faith led him to take actions that, driven by fear, would have looked so different. And ultimately, God was glorified through his decision. God was lifted up. The world was to know the name of the God of Daniel because of Daniel's decision. So this week, as we go out into our worlds, back to work, back to school, back to our families, I want to challenge you. Every decision that you make this week, ask yourself, am I making this decision out of fear or out of faith? Am I going to trust God in these decisions today? So if you're willing and able, why don't you stand with us as we sing this last song?